Lexigo presents The Native Experience with your host, Brian.
Hello, world. This is Brian from Lexigo.com, and you were listening to the Native Experience podcast, the show that uses pop culture references to illustrate multicultural and intercultural approaches to marketing. This is going to be fun. Our goal in this podcast is to go beyond translation and localization and discuss creating truly native experiences for diverse audiences. Today, we're talking with Tony Lee, head of strategy at Lexigo. Are you tired of spending hours transcribing audio or video content? Do you want to create accessible content for a wider audience but struggle with time-consuming subtitling and translation? You know what? It's time for you to check out Scribe. Scribe is the effortless solution for transcription, subtitling, and translation. You can translate speech to text in record time, create on-brand subtitles instantly, and even translate and create subtitles across 171 languages in just minutes. It's amazing. So, reach more audiences, create accessible content in any language for any platform, anywhere. Head on over to lexigo.com/scribe to try it on out and see how it can transform your media content creation process. All right, let's rock it. We're going to be talking with Tony Lee, the head of strategy at Lexigo. As an industry stalwart, Tony started his marketing career in the mid-90s when Yahoo was still the #1 search engine and Beanie Babies were all the rage. With decades of experience helping brands to launch, communicate, and grow, Tony has worked across a gamut of commercial, not-for-profit, and government sectors, developing marketing communication for just about anything you can think of, including baby products and burial plots. Tony has also dedicated the last few years championing diversity, equity, and inclusion initiatives, especially within the LGBTIQ+ community, with his leadership and board positions at Minus 18, Switchboard Victoria, Melbourne Queer Film Festival, and the Victorian Pride Center. Tony moonlights as a lecturer in marketing, brand management, and digital marketing strategy for RMIT University, and in his spare time, he even freelances as a strategic marketing coach and photographer. Tony, welcome back to the Native Experience. Thanks for joining me again.
Great to be here.
I appreciate it. So you were on episode 1. We had kind of there was like a full house kind of thing. Everybody was together hanging out, talking about what the podcast was all about. It was a good time, but now you're coming back. We're going to dive a little bit more into some marketing stuff, but with a twist, which I'm excited for.
Yeah, good to hear. Good to hear that there's a twist that you're excited about.
You're like, I don't even know what the twist is. Yeah, what are you gonna...
Yeah, that's it. What are you going to throw at me?
Oh, don't worry, it'll be a surprise. No, I'm just kidding.
Yeah.
I hope you have an idea. No, you do. But first of all, just a reminder, tell us about yourself personally and professionally. Tell us what you're also nerding out on right now for fun.
Yeah, sure. Look, I'm Tony Lee. I'm the head of strategy at Lexigo. I've been in this position for about 2 years now. And I help out with intercultural communication campaigns. So really taking campaigns and looking at efficacy in terms of communicating with multicultural audiences and working out ways to improve communication to reach the intended audiences. And I've been in the industry for over 25 years. So I remember when I first came to Australia when I was a little kid. I was one of very few Asian people within this school. And so I had a great fascination with culture and was very curious about other people's cultures. I was very curious about other people's cultures.
Yeah.
And I grew a fascination with advertising. I saw advertising as being this little window into the zeitgeist of society and what people were talking about and what people were interested in. And I found it very fascinating to hear these little stories and to see representations, I guess, of lifestyles and ideas that I wouldn't have been exposed to. And I've always retained that fascination with advertising and communications. And so I built a career out of it. And I've been in this industry for over 25 years
awesome.
As a result of that. Yeah, so really seen the industry move in lots of different ways. I mean, I started my career when Yahoo was the #1 search engine. This is pre-Google. And have really sort of seen it morph, the communications industry morph from media and marketing and brands
Mm-hmm.
being responsible for the communication and having control over the media and the message. And then through social media adoption and what we have today in terms of streaming, a lot more access to individuals have greater access now
Yeah.
to a lot more channels and the ability to access communication and media on demand, and also create those messages and co-create those messages. So what I'm finding really interesting at the moment is seeing how that is playing out in mainstream media and communications.
Yeah.
And one of the sort of the things that I'm always fascinated by is how multicultural marketing communications seems to be a bit behind when it comes to meeting this pace and this growth. So I'm really fascinated to sort of see this grow and evolve over the next few years or so as more interest in things like AI start to come to the fore, and how we use this emerging technology to really enhance the way that we communicate and communicate in new and exciting intercultural ways.
Yeah, well, that's really cool. You know, it's interesting that you mentioned all the stuff that with the marketing and everything like that. I'm not like, marketing for me is not natural. I'm fascinated by advertising and marketing as well, but it's not something that just comes naturally to me on how to communicate that. But one thing that I think I've come to, you'll have to correct me if I'm wrong on this one, but I've come to the conclusion that marketing is a really, really strong level of influencing someone or multiple people on how to think and how to act. And sometimes it's done in a very negative way and, you know, kind of almost a malicious way, of course. And sometimes it's done in a very powerfully beautiful way that can really change things and move. But I feel like it is a way of communicating to people on a level that they make a choice in some way or another. Like, it's a motivation. Am I making any sense here?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, when you think about the idea of communication involves a sender and it involves a receiver.
Yeah.
In the instance of marketing, the sender is somebody who is paying to create communication in order to reach the sender, in order to reflect a behavior, an attitude, or an action that they want them to take.
Yeah. Okay.
So I think in many ways, marketing represents or marketing communication. It represents part of culture. Communication is culture, and culture is communication. I sort of see it that way. But yeah, rather than just being a mirror, rather than just being a mirror in society, I feel like marketing has a really powerful role to play, a powerful role and ability to shape the way we see culture and see ourselves reflected in that culture.
So let's take the movie Barbie, for example. I've not seen it yet, but almost everybody I know has seen it, and there are some very strong opinions right now about, you know, hey, this is really good, or hey, this is really offensive, or whatever the case may be, right? But again, I haven't seen it, so I can't say. But have you seen it, by the way?
Yeah, I have. Yeah, it's a great movie. I love it.
Good. So you'll be able to kind of talk to this a little bit. But one thing that I've experienced, so I'm an avid TV and movie watcher. I love that stuff. I used to host podcasts about TV shows and stuff like that. And one of my first TV show podcasts was about the TV show Arrow, you know, DC Comics. And when that show first came out, I mean, it was revolutionary. It was kind of like, hey, Iron Man and a couple of other Marvel movies had just come out. This was the first of the DC anything comic-wise that was actually pretty good. You know, like, hey, this is kind of cool. And thus began the superhero era. Arrow and era, we're going to go with that. That is starting to kind of, I think, fizzle a little bit right now. My point is the first two seasons were fantastic story. And then it started to kind of integrate real life issues. Now, keep in mind, this is done in a fictional universe, a fictional world. It's technically not even, quote, our Earth, because they have this whole multiverse thing. I'm getting nerdy now, but I'm just throwing this out. But what they started doing was taking real life events that were happening in real life to all of us and putting that into the TV show as, well, this is happening, even though it's technically a different Earth and it's a different, it's a different reality. Thus began the agendas. And so then people were like, oh, that's cool, and other people were like, you're taking away from the storytelling. It started creating some frustration in the fans and stuff like that. That said, I see that a lot in TV and media and movies right now. And Barbie was one of them, where they definitely not only told a story, but also very much had a very clear message that they wanted people to hear. Whether it was done great or not, again, I haven't seen it. I have no debate on that personally. But marketing, on the other hand, this is where I'm going with this, by the way.
Yeah, sure.
Marketing, on the other hand, is one of those things that it's almost subtle that you're influencing somebody in a way, like you said, to take an action or to make a decision or whatever. But it's a little bit more subtle, and it still influences them. And so, I don't know. I'm just trying to feel like, is marketing a more effective way if it's done, again, with good intentions? Let's just assume good intentions here. Is marketing more effective than some of the, let's call them agendas or messages that movies and TV shows are trying to achieve right now? See where I'm going with this?
I think it's an interesting question. There's probably like a few different layers in terms of how I could answer this. But
yeah,
if we think about what marketing is essentially we're trying to deliver a message from a sender to a receiver. We're trying to deliver a message. That message is engineered and organized and orchestrated, and it's understood based on who we're talking to.
Mm-hmm.
So a good marketer will always know who they're talking to, what their motivations are, what their goals are, what their pain points are, and be able to reflect that into communication by presenting a solution to a problem that sometimes that particular consumer or receiver of that message may not know that they needed. They had in the first place, a problem that they had in the first place. So there's consumer psychology that comes behind that. There's a ton of research that comes behind that, but there's also an agenda that a marketer seeks to enforce and inform. So like subtle sometimes, not so subtle other times. But I want to come back to your point around this whole idea of I feel like the multiverse is like a huge plot point, or like a device that's used by storytellers so much now in order to reimagine or even retcon in many ways like problematic aspects of like history and that kind of sort of thing. So I do actually think that is really bleeding into communication at the moment. And I mean, Donald Trump sort of did this with his whole sort of notion around things like fake news, and this idea has suddenly permeated in society that the information that you're seeing you can't necessarily trust. So I feel like at the moment a lot of communication is focusing around trust. Establishing trust. And once again, this comes back to this multiverse notion that when you're a storyteller, you're creating a universe. And marketers are just storytellers as well. So they're creating a universe. They're creating the rules of that universe, how you engage with that communication, what the communication is, the codes that people pick up from the language and the imagery and the messaging. That's all created in this universe that marketers are responsible for, and inviting audiences into that universe to spend a bit of time there. It's vitally important. And I think the parallels between storytelling broadly, storytelling trends broadly, and marketing are very much hand in glove at the moment.
That is so fascinating. I was just going to say, I've never heard a marketer explain it ever, just like you did right now. And that was like what you just said. All of a sudden, I just went, oh, why have I been like, I feel like marketing has been this foreign language to me my whole life. And what you just said right there was like, oh, I already do that. I just need to learn how to get better at it, right? But I already do that. I'm a storyteller. I mean, and I'm trying to communicate solutions. One other thing I wanted to say, this is huge. You said that marketers are trying to provide a solution. That right there is like that. I think that's one of the biggest things that sets marketing apart from like messages and TV shows and stuff. Again, this is not always true, right? Sometimes it is solution oriented, but I do find that a lot of the messages and TV shows and movies and stuff, again, they're trying to influence people, right? That's why I'm bringing this up. They don't usually present a solution. They present the problem and then it ends. And then that's the end of the story. Whereas marketing is trying to provide a solution for you. Sorry, go ahead.
No, absolutely. Marketing often is providing the solution. Usually the marketer is the hero of that, of the plot, really. But increasingly, I think marketing needs to change to make the customer the hero.
Ooh, I
Because
like that.
ultimately the customer needs to be the hero, because ultimately they're the ones that have to go. That's their story that they're telling. So you have to make it relevant to your plot device, your marketing, whatever product you're selling. That's a plot device, I guess,
Yeah.
has to be relevant for that hero's story. So trying to make that connection is super important. But I want to come back to this idea of storytelling,
Yeah.
because in many ways, I actually think about brand as being the story. I always say to I'm a lecturer at RMIT on branding. And I always say to my students, a brand is a story that is always being told. But I also say that a brand is a promise that you keep with every touch point. And storytelling is exactly the same. You've got this legacy kind of idea about what Arrow is, for example. And you've told yourself that story over and over again, and it's
Mhm.
reinforced in what you've sort of seen.
Yeah.
But when that changes, your relationship with the story and your understanding of the story also changes. And if it doesn't fit, you might find that a bit jarring.
Yeah.
So the careful tension for a lot of storytellers and marketers is that if they're changing the story, how do you do it in a way that you bring the audience along with you and don't alienate them?
Yeah.
Which is becoming increasingly more difficult
Yeah.
as our attitudes in society and our ethos changes. How do we keep up with those changes without having to retcon history?
Sure.
Because people, and this is why cancellation culture exists at the moment.
Yeah.
We're sort of seeing brands and people, and we're drumming up their past and presenting that in the future in a multiverse kind of way, I guess, and then using that past to represent what's the current the current
Mhm.
situation, and as a result of that, it becomes the story that is being told at the moment, which dominates any other story that might come about from that particular brand or business or person.
Yeah.
Uh, yeah.
So
So all
really,
we can do is cancel.
what's that?
All we can do is cancel.
Well, it's okay. So I'm thinking about this a little bit too, because I mean, history is history, and I think that I think the danger of like rewriting history or and this goes for marketing too, right? Is that once you take it away, then the lessons learned disappear too. So it's almost like I feel like learning from history, but not repeating those same mistakes. Changing the narrative, I think, is what's so important right now. Because yeah, if you take away the mistakes, then who's to say you're going to make? I mean, people make them all the time, right? We continue to make mistakes, but if you take away the lessons learned, then what's to stop you from making those same mistakes again?
I think there's a receptivity around, like, we have to acknowledge that the mistake existed in the first place. And I think
Yeah,
a lot
absolutely.
of brands, businesses get this wrong. They don't acknowledge, they just move on. They hope people forget. But
Yeah.
look, we have the internet now. The internet has a very long memory.
Oh yeah.
So it
Yeah.
can't work that way. And this comes back to this idea of authenticity and trust. We have to build trust
Yeah.
because if we make mistakes, only the people that trust us and who have been loyal to us, they're the only ones that can forgive us.
Mm-hmm.
So we need to mobilize as many people as possible in those kind of contexts. So there's such an emphasis around building community and trust around brands and businesses and the way they communicate.
Absolutely. And mistakes will happen. There is no way that a company will ever be free of mistakes. You're going to make mistakes. But you're right. And I find that I see businesses especially, like you said, they try to hide things. They try to hope people will forget. And it's like, nah, just, you make a mistake. You're not perfect. Own up to it, move forward, learn from it, make it better. I mean, that's really what it comes down to. I mean, if I saw companies doing that more often, I would trust them more personally.
Yeah, that's right. I think that's certainly very true of the younger generation as well, who are
That's good.
grown up globally, if you like, because they've got access to all these cultures from international access points coming into their devices, their personal devices. So they've got a world, a broader worldview on the way that they see society and their place in it. And so they're demanding a lot more in terms of treating brands and holding them to account. And they want to see that transparency. They want to see that authenticity. They want to see brands operate as good citizens in the society that they're helping to shape.
Yeah, absolutely. So, okay, let's discuss a little bit more of the localization aspect of marketing too, because
Mm.
obviously, if you are in a monocultural standpoint, that's got a factor versus if you're doing multicultural, cross-cultural, that kind of thing. You're wanting to get into a new country, you're wanting to, basically create something that's going to essentially be for a new people group that you have not necessarily worked with or interacted with. So I'm kind of curious to all of those different things. If you're working with people within your own, again, monocultural, I can't say that. You're working with people in your monoculture versus the multicultural standpoint. Talk about some of those things. Talk about those different approaches and anything we should know.
Yeah, well, maybe it might be useful just to talk about what the differences are between a monocultural and multicultural
That'd be great.
approach, particularly when it comes to marketing. So if we take sort of the principle that all communication is about senders and receivers. So you're a sender, you're a brand, you're a business, you're trying to communicate to an audience, the receiver. Multicultural marketing introduces an intermediary to act as that interpreter, that translator. For that communication. So that's really sort of how that works.
Okay.
In monocultural communication, the majority of the communication, the emphasis of that is that there's a dominant language of the land, and there's a presumption that anybody who wants to interact with your language has to learn your language. Unfortunately, most communication in Australia is done in this context. It's all done in English, and there's an expectation that if those who want to engage with that particular piece of communication, they should learn English. There's not a great deal of a push or a desire to try to engage people in other languages. So monocultural communication tends to be the dominant form of communication in Australia.
Okay.
When we look at multicultural communication, just sort of breaking down that word of multicultural communication acknowledges that there are other people from different language groups that exist side by side with the dominant language group. And it takes the principle that, in order to communicate with other audiences in other languages, that we take the dominant language and then we get it. So a lot of translation comes through from multicultural communication, the multicultural communication approach. But it's the idea that these cultures kind of sit parallel to one another. They don't really engage with one another. They don't intersect with one another.
Yeah.
They are side by side, and they're left to their own devices. So the communication is simply translated and placed into an environment where another culture can pick it up. And understand that communication. So there's a little bit more effort in terms of trying to reach audiences from whose language isn't English. And then there's also cross-cultural communication, which makes an attempt to make that communication a little bit more importable into another language. So it looks at prioritizing the similarities between cultural nuances of language and emphasizing maybe the small differences, subtle differences, and making small tweaks to the language. But the idea is that you would have one form of communication that maybe can tap into lots of different types of cultures. And so most of the time you end up with really innocuous type of communication. There might be, if you don't have if you have a lack of cultural competence or the advice, it can often result in watered down communication. Sometimes it results in reinforcing stereotypes. Sometimes you see tokenism. So there's there's a person from every culture represented. But the way that we like to look at communication is intercultural. So it's often cited as the most effective form of cultural communication, and it centers around the idea that there's an active participation. There's a co-creation process between two or more cultures. So if you think about the idea of a sender and receiver, as opposed to being a sender and an intermediary, sender sending communication to an intermediary to interpret for an audience. The intermediary and the sender are working in tandem to create the message so that it's a clearer message that goes straight to the receiver. And it's co-created together. So that's the approach that we take at we try to take as much as we can with Lexigo, because we feel that ultimately if a community or a language group is a participant in the creation of the message, they're more likely to be receptive of that message
Yeah.
as well when it's delivered. It's a simple kind of context, but you'll be surprised that very few people will think about this as a primary consideration when it comes to creating marketing for multicultural communities. And this is where we often see some tension, because it's always a conversation around things like price versus quality versus speed. And often when it comes to multicultural communication, we find that the communication or the translation comes at the end,
Mm.
when really the ideal scenario should be, it should be at the beginning of the actual communication itself.
Yeah.
So create a better message to create the efficacy, rather than hoping that the English version of that is going to translate the best it can to reach and engage with audiences.
Yeah. Wow, very interesting. So you said a lot of people they're not doing it. Is it a lack of awareness, or is it a resistance to, basically implementing an intercultural approach?
Yeah, I feel like there's a couple of things, because we live in most of people who work in the marketing industry live in a monocultural kind of context.
Sure.
So recently I saw a survey a couple of years ago that suggested that something like 85% of people in the marketing, communications, and media industry are Caucasian.
Interesting.
Will come from Anglo-European kind of cultures, and only 15% of people surveyed come from backgrounds, cultural and linguistically diverse backgrounds,
Huh.
which I found really fascinating.
Yeah.
That proportion is really low when it comes to comparisons to, I mean, almost 50% of the population of Australia have either born overseas or have a parent that's born overseas.
Yeah.
So I find that really fascinating, that we are a multicultural society, and yet somehow that hasn't been reflected in who we recruit to to communications industry. And the other thing is that there's also a massive lack of representation in terms of senior leadership
Yeah.
in a lot of these agencies as well. And that's just not a trend that's in Australia. It's also in America and the UK as well.
Absolutely.
Similar surveys have been sort of sent out, and that insight always seems to come up. But I do think that there's a bit of maybe a bit of fear, a bit of a lack of know-how, and it does come to that time and budget allocation. I also am always constantly surprised how little people prioritize multicultural components of communication in their budgets. It's usually seen as an afterthought. And yeah, I really wish that people would actually think about prioritizing it, because I actually think it's important in terms of a societal, the health of society, if we're going to foster the notion and support multiculturalism.
Yeah.
It needs to be represented in the stories that we're telling through the media.
What are some steps and tips that you recommend that businesses can take now in order to implement it?
Fundamentally, I think this is about establishing ties, establishing partnerships, and working with people with lived experience, culturally and linguistically diverse lived experience. And I actually think that as an overarching kind of construct here, having more diverse voices create more interesting stories. You're seeing things from different perspectives, and you're showcasing and highlighting and educating people in ways and ideas that they may not have seen before. I also think there's a greater emphasis around prioritizing observation. And I always think whenever I start a project, whenever in marketing, it could be for any product or brand, I like to immerse myself in understanding that product, and understanding that audience. And I just feel like marketers need to adapt the similar sort of psychology when it comes to any form of communication. So if they really want to adopt a more intercultural approach to marketing, have dialogue, immerse yourself in that culture, find people that you can partner with who you can share lived experiences about, talk about the intentions of what you're trying to communicate, find someone to get some feedback, like have a dialogue. Dialogue requires two people. And then I think fundamentally it's about changing the mindset as well. The best businesses communicate with an empathy lens. So they always think about what the audience is expecting or wanting, their needs, their fears, their desires.
Yeah.
Take it a step further and think with an intercultural lens, and invite, work with partners, share experiences, and we can do that through partnerships, or we can think about things like recruiting, or an awareness, a general awareness of sort of what's going on outside of the monoculture.
I love it. I love it. It's so important, and I completely agree that there needs to be a push for this, a implementation of it, making sure that people are represented and, cared for, in addition to just being represented, but also cared for and being, lifted up and that kind of thing. So I totally agree with that. I have a naive question I'm going to ask, only because I'm not in marketing, so I don't understand, the industry as well as you do. But being in content creation myself, there's definitely a caution against trying to not, do something for everybody, if that makes sense. So you're respecting and valuing everybody, but you're not trying to reach everybody, if that makes sense. And so my question in marketing, and this is, like I said, this could be a dumb question, but I'm going to ask it. Is there a danger of getting too broad? Like, obviously you want to represent everybody. Like, there's just absolutely no question about that. But is there a danger in getting to the point where you lose the identity of who you're trying to reach at that point, if you're trying to include everybody? Does that make sense? Like you're trying to reach everybody, so therefore you're reaching nobody?
Yeah.
Kind of thing. Is there a caution in that area, or what?
100%. I mean,
Okay.
I don't believe in that concept of I think that modern technology, modern marketing, gives you so many tools and opportunities to have personal dialogue with your intended audience. So this idea of mass communication, that needs to change. That's the thing that needs to change.
Okay.
So find where people are actually engaging and meet them there. That is really the best advice there. So you can still apply a communication goal of trying to reach many people, but meet them with communication that's going to be efficient and also resonate with those people.
With that person. Okay.
Yeah. So why waste your time creating communication that's kind of like watered down or broad?
Oh yeah.
When you can be very specific and very targeted. I feel like modern marketing technology lends itself very well to multicultural marketing.
Totally.
But we haven't harnessed this as well. And I do think that it's really important that we do have this representation, because, as I said, communication is culture and culture is communication. The media we consume really has a profound influence on how we see and how we understand and how we treat people, both those within and those who are different from our own race or ethnicity. Growing up, I saw very few image portrayals of Asian people in communications.
Yeah.
And so I always felt like I was, I didn't really belong in that society. Imagine how powerful it would be, how healthier it would be if people started to see themselves reflected in the stories.
Totally.
If they see themselves reflected in those stories, then of course they have positive portrayals of how they impact the world. And it affects how they see themselves, but also it resonates in a way that is actually going to help change behaviors, change attitudes, encourage action, whatever the marketing communication needs to for the consumer to do.
Yeah. Oh, I love that. And that's where, like you were saying earlier too, making sure that you can bring people in that have that either that background or that experience or whatever it is that they can then communicate effectively to specific people. Because I mean, I can tell you right now, like if I'm trying to communicate to let's just even say a different, not even necessarily a cultural group, but like somebody that lives in a different community, for example, they're going to have different language, different style, different things. And if I try to go relate to them, I might not be able to. I'm going to try, but what if I can't really, like you said, resonate with them? So that's where I like what you were saying earlier about surrounding yourself with people who can help with that, who maybe they live that life. Maybe they, like you said, just being able to create something where no matter who that person is out there, someone can go, hey, I resonate with that. I feel like I'm part of this now and not an outsider anymore. But that's where, I mean, it's like talking to you about marketing. If I was to come in and start talking about marketing, it would be a bad idea, right? So having someone who knows what they're talking about, or again, lives that life, or has that experience, or is of that people group, or whatever you want to call it, I think that's where you got to surround yourself with that. So that's awesome. But no, I love the passion you have and where you're going with this. And, before we got onto the show, I know we were talking a little bit about how there's people out there talking about what needs to get done, but that they don't necessarily do anything about it. And that's why I brought up the whole TV show and movie thing I see that a lot. Here's what we talk about, what's going on, or maybe they complain about it or whatever, but nobody really offers any solutions on, okay, what's the next step then? What do we do in order to just get the ball rolling here?
Mm.
And I appreciate that you're sharing with that, but go ahead.
Look, change is hard. I mean, like
totally.
I often say this to my students as well. Like, the human condition is to change. Like, we're constantly evolving, we're constantly changing, and yet when it comes to messaging, what people's expectations and storytelling, people hate change. So there's a great incongruity around how people perceive the way the world works, and the businesses and the brands that and the stories that are being told. There's a great incongruence, this idea of sort of change and holding true to a storytelling narrative. But I want to pick up on your point. A common thing that I hear from a lot of marketers is that, I don't want to engage with that because I might say something wrong. So all that does is that leads to avoidance behavior and fear, and it can be really seductive to never confront that. But I like to think about the analogy of, like, when you go into a country, a different country, and you go in as a tourist and you don't understand the culture, you don't understand the language, you bring in a tour guide. They're there to act as that Sherpa, if you like, to help you navigate and guide through that in a sensitive way. And yet, when it comes to engaging in multicultural communications, that seems to be forgotten. Like, there are multicultural agency specialists who can act as that tour guide, multicultural agency specialists that can act like that tour guide and give you access to people who are able to understand the context in which you're coming in and shape the experience, shape your understanding to help support your goal. So it's a much healthier thing to do rather than this avoidance behavior. Embrace a growth mindset and lean into understanding and immersing yourself in understanding these cultures.
Yeah. I'm glad you said that, because just so you know, I wasn't trying to create the avoidance thing at all. But then when you said that, I thought, oh yeah, you're right. That does happen. I'm one of those weird people that's just going to go out and just make a fool of myself trying to understand people, because I'm curious. I'm very curious. I love people. I love getting to know them and learning about all of them and their cultures and all of their little quirks. And I love that stuff. And I don't mind going out there and, like I said, making a fool of myself, but a lot of people are afraid to do that. And that's kind of why I was bringing it up too, is to say, if you don't have the, if you don't talk the talk and walk the walk kind of thing, is it going to be effective? But what you just said there was perfect about how we can be effective. So thank you.
No, you're welcome.
I love it.
I do think that, like, a lot of people suffer from this idea of imposter syndrome. Like, particularly when you're a marketer, you have to embody these personas that you wouldn't you may not even like shop from a particular brand or product or whatever. So you do embody an imposter syndrome. But imagine adding a layer of if you're a culturally and linguistically diverse person, imagine navigating the monoculture. From that context. So I think people just need to establish a sort of this empathy, this understanding that it's different for other people as well. And like people from cultural and linguistically diverse backgrounds, they have to navigate this all the time. So meet them halfway. Yeah. It's really, in the overall scheme of things, not a challenging thing to do. Once you get the hang of it, they have to code switch all the time, cultural and linguistically diverse people, to make it more comfortable for others. So I think it's a matter of standing up to the challenge and embracing that philosophy.
Yeah, I love it. This has been amazing. I appreciate this conversation, and I know that there's more that we could talk about, but we should probably wrap up to keep this relatively, bite-sized for everybody. But I would love to keep going on this one. Any last piece of, let's say, encouragement or advice or tips or anything you want to leave us with?
Let me think about this.
I mean, you've already given a lot, so just figured I'd ask.
Yeah, let me just think about
parting comments.
A parting comment. Yeah. Look, the very best creative and communication doesn't just sell products and build brands. It can also change behaviors, and it can shape society. And therefore, as an industry, the marketing industry, we've got an important role to lead that change, and that's the change that I want to see.
Love it. I love it. Tony, thank you. This has been fun, and it's been educational for me too, which is great, and I hope it has been for other people, because as we're all trying to deliver a better native experience. This is an essential part of it. So thank you very much for sharing all of this. I want to bring you back on and talk more, because I think we could get into even a little more detail and maybe some updates as time comes. But thanks for your time. Appreciate it.
You're absolutely welcome. And do see Barbie. I think it's an amazing example of, I guess, how brand legacies can change and also help shape conversations that lead us to a more positive future.
I love it. I will do that. Awesome. Thank you. Tony Lee, head of strategy at Lexigo. My name is Brian. Thank you so much for joining us today. We'd love to hear from you. Send us your questions and comments over on email, nx@lexigo.com. Thank you again for joining us. Have a wonderful day. We'll talk to you soon. And remember to always strive for authenticity and embrace the power of native experiences.